I'm Corinne, 34 years old, and I once thought my marriage was as solid as the foundations of the buildings my husband designed. For 10 years, I believed we were building something beautiful together. Until our anniversary dinner, when Thomas declared his love for another woman in front of all our friends. The silence that followed was deafening, but what I said next changed everything. If you've ever had to think quickly in a moment of betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe to see how I turned public humiliation into the best thing that ever happened to me. I met Thomas during my final year at art school. He was 27, a rising star at an architecture firm designing our campus's new arts building. I was 24, full of dreams about gallery showings and making a living from my paintings. We literally bumped into each other when I was carrying a large canvas across campus and couldn't see where I was going. "Whoa there," he said, steadying me before I could topple over. "That's quite a statement piece." The painting was an abstract representation of urban decay and renewal with vibrant colors pushing through layers of gray. Not my best work, but Thomas looked at it like it was a masterpiece. He asked thoughtful questions about my technique and inspiration, seeming genuinely interested rather than just making conversation. "I'm supervising the new arts building," he explained. "Would you want to grab coffee and tell me what students actually need in a studio space?" That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into a whirlwind romance. Thomas was everything I thought I wanted: intelligent, ambitious, supportive of my art. Our conversations flowed effortlessly from architecture to Renaissance painters to our favorite pizza toppings. "You see the world differently," he told me one night as we lay on a blanket stargazing in a local park. "You notice beauty where others just see ordinary things." 9 months later, we were married in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. I wore a vintage dress I'd found at a thrift shop and restored. Thomas cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. After the honeymoon, reality set in. Thomas's career was demanding, requiring long hours and frequent meetings with clients. Meanwhile, I was struggling to find gallery representation. "Maybe teaching art would be more stable," Thomas suggested after I received my 5th rejection letter. "Just until your work gets discovered, your passion would inspire students." Looking back, I can see this was the first compromise that slowly led me away from my dreams. But at the time, it seemed like a practical solution. I got my teaching certificate and landed a job at a local high school, telling myself it was temporary. The years passed. We bought our first home, a fixer-upper that Thomas redesigned on weekends. I created a small studio in the spare bedroom, but found myself too exhausted after teaching to create much. Thomas was promoted to associate, then partner at his firm. Our social circle solidified around 5 couples most connected through Thomas's work. We vacationed together annually, rotating planning duties. Around year 3, we started trying for a baby. Month after month of disappointment followed. Tests revealed minor fertility issues on both sides. Nothing insurmountable, but requiring medical intervention we weren't ready to pursue. "Maybe it's not meant to be," Thomas said after particularly painful news from my gynecologist. "We have each other. Maybe that's enough." We refocused on our careers and relationship. Thomas threw himself into bigger projects, often bringing work home to discuss with me over dinner. I found unexpected fulfillment in teaching, especially mentoring talented students who reminded me of my younger self. For almost a decade, we seemed solid. We hosted dinner parties where friends commented on our easy relationship. We had inside jokes and vacation traditions. Thomas surprised me with art supplies on random Tuesdays. I learned to make his favorite complex dishes from scratch. From the outside, we were the couple others envied. But looking back, I realized we were building our marriage on shifting sand. Thomas's dreams kept expanding while mine contracted. I told myself this was love compromise adulthood. I didn't recognize that each time I folded my desires to make room for his, I was losing another piece of myself. By our 9th anniversary, The foundation was already cracking, though I couldn't yet see how badly. The shift began so subtly that I almost missed it. Thomas's firm had landed a major contract redesigning a historic downtown block into mixed-use space. The project required new talent, and several architects were hired, including Amanda Pearson. "She's brilliant," Thomas mentioned casually over dinner about a week after she started. "Just finished her master's at Cornell. Has this incredible vision for sustainable urban spaces." I nodded, genuinely interested in his work as always. "Sounds like she'll be good for the downtown project." "Exactly. She's already challenged some of my initial concepts in ways that actually improve them." I was happy for him. Thomas thrived on creative collaboration, and I knew firsthand how rewarding it could be to work with talented peers. So when Amanda's name started appearing more frequently in conversation, I thought nothing of it, until I noticed other changes. Thomas, who'd always been somewhat casual about his appearance, suddenly became particular about his clothes. He bought new shirts, got more frequent haircuts, started using cologne daily rather than just for special occasions. "Just because I'm approaching 40 doesn't mean I have to look it," he said when I commented on the new designer watch that replaced the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. Around the same time, my renewed interest in painting became a source of tension rather than connection between us. One Saturday, I was working on a new piece when Thomas came into my studio space. "Still playing with your hobby, I see?" He said the word hobby, landing like a slap. "It's not a hobby, Thomas. It's my art. It's who I am." He sighed. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if you're just spinning your wheels. You've been a teacher for so long now, maybe it's time to focus on advancing in that career rather than dividing your attention." The criticism stung, especially coming from the person who once said my artistic perspective was what drew him to me. When did my passion become an inconvenience to him? Our 9th anniversary fell during a crucial phase of the downtown project. I made reservations at our favorite restaurant, but the morning of, Thomas called. "I'm so sorry, but we've hit a major issue with the environmental impact assessment. The whole team is staying late to rework the proposal." I swallowed my disappointment. "The whole team, including the new people?" "Yes, everyone's hands on deck. Amanda's actually been instrumental in identifying the problem." Rain check for this weekend. We never did celebrate that anniversary. The weekend brought another emergency, then a client visit, then a deadline. And with each cancellation, I felt myself sliding further down Thomas's priority list. One night, while Thomas was showering, his phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter. I wasn't the snooping type, but the name caught my eye. Amanda, with 3 messages in a row. "Final revisions complete. I think we nailed it. Let me know if you want to review over breakfast tomorrow. That tie you wore today was perfect with your eyes, BTW." The last message made my stomach drop. It wasn't overtly romantic, but it crossed the line from professional to personal in a way that made me uncomfortable. When Thomas came downstairs, I showed him the messages. "Is there something I should know about you and Amanda?" He looked genuinely confused, then laughed. "Are you serious? She's a colleague, Corinne. A brilliant one. Are you really going to turn this into some jealousy drama?" The comment about your tie seemed personal. "She has an eye for design. That's literally her job and mine. You're reading into this because you've always been insecure about my work relationships." "I have not. Remember Jordan from the Boston project? You were convinced something was happening there too." This was a complete fabrication. I'd never expressed concern about Jordan or any other colleague before, but Thomas said it with such conviction that I momentarily questioned my own memory. "Look," he said more gently, taking my hands. "I understand. Your job is pretty static, and mine puts me in contact with new creative people all the time. It's natural to feel some professional jealousy, but you need to trust me." I apologized, feeling ridiculous for my suspicions. That night, my best friend Dina called to catch up. "How are things with you and Thomas?" she asked after telling me about her latest dating disaster. "Fine, I guess. Busy with his new project." Just fine. That doesn't sound like the Corinne who used to gush about her amazing husband. The observation hit hard. When had fine become my standard answer, I told her about the text messages and Thomas's reaction. That's concerning, Dina said carefully. Not the texts themselves necessarily, but how he turned it around on you. Has he done that before? The question lingered with me long after we hung up. Had he? I couldn't pinpoint examples, but a vague uneasiness settled over me. Something was changing in our marriage, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if we were changing together or growing apart. The next 6 months felt like watching my marriage fade, like a Polaroid left in the sun. The vibrant colors of our life together gradually washed out until I could barely recognize what we'd once been. Thomas started taking weekend work retreats with his team to focus intensively on project phases. He'd return home late Sunday nights, too tired to talk much beyond basic updates. You wouldn't enjoy it, he assured me when I asked about joining one weekend. It's all work presentations, technical discussions. We barely leave the conference rooms. I tried to reconnect by planning date nights, making reservations at restaurants Thomas had mentioned wanting to try. But more often than not, he'd call last minute with a work emergency. Rain check became his catchphrase, always followed by promises to make it up to me that never materialized. After 4 canceled dates in a row, I finally had the opportunity to meet Amanda at a firm function Thomas couldn't reasonably exclude me from. The annual holiday party was a tradition for partners and their spouses. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a deep green dress that Thomas had once said brought out the gold flecks in my eyes. I curled my hair, applied makeup more carefully than I had in months, desperately wanting to feel beautiful and confident when meeting the woman who dominated so much of my husband's time. The party was at an upscale hotel downtown. Walking in on Thomas's arm, I felt a momentary return to our old connection as he introduced me proudly to newer employees. Then I saw her across the room, looking directly at us. Amanda Pearson was everything I'd feared. Early 30s, tall and elegantly slender, with a sleek bob and impeccable style in a tailored black jumpsuit that screamed professional confidence. When Thomas waved her over, I noticed her eyes light up until she registered my presence. Amanda, this is my wife, Corinne. Corinne, this is Amanda, our sustainability genius. Lovely to finally meet you, she said, shaking my hand firmly. Thomas talks about you all the time. It was the kind of polite lie people tell at parties, but I couldn't recall Thomas mentioning me to anyone in months. Funny, he talks about you all the time too, I replied, with equal politeness. What followed was 20 excruciating minutes of conversation where I felt increasingly like an outsider. They discussed project details using terminology and shorthand. I couldn't follow, laughed at inside jokes about colleagues I'd never met, and referred to shared experiences from work retreats. Remember that disastrous presentation when the projector died? Amanda laughed. And you saved us with that hand-drawn sketch on the hotel napkins. Thomas finished looking at her with unmistakable admiration. The client said it showed more passion than any PowerPoint could have. They were finishing each other's sentences, standing slightly too close, radiating a natural comfort that Thomas and I had lost somewhere along the way. When Amanda excused herself to greet another colleague, I turned to Thomas. You two seem close? His expression immediately hardened. Don't start this again, Corinne. She's a valuable team member, and I'm her mentor. I just observed that you seem to have good chemistry. Professional chemistry. You're embarrassing yourself with this insecurity. This is why I hesitate to bring you to work functions. The words stung like a slap. When have I ever embarrassed you at a work event? You're doing it right now, creating tension where there is none. People can sense jealousy, Corinne. It's unattractive and reflects poorly on both of us. I fell silent, doubting myself again. Was I imagining the connection I'd witnessed? Was my insecurity creating problems where none existed? I withdrew emotionally for the rest of the evening, smiling mechanically as Thomas paraded me around to the right people. On the drive home, he acted as though our exchange had never happened, chatting about office politics and the excellent catering. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I slipped out of bed and went to my neglected studio. For the first time in months, I felt an urgent need to paint. I worked until sunrise, creating a chaotic canvas of fractured shapes and shadowy figures. Looking at it in the morning light, I saw my marriage laid bare, broken into pieces that no longer fit together. I began painting regularly again, finding solace in the one space where I could express my confusion and pain. Thomas barely noticed my renewed passion except to comment on the mess when paint occasionally migrated beyond my studio. 3 months later, I was invited to display work in a small local gallery as part of a community artist showcase. When I sold my first painting, a bittersweet landscape titled Fading Light, for $400, I rushed home to tell Thomas. He was in his home office, surrounded by blueprints. "That's nice," he said without looking up. "Though hardly a career breakthrough. Probably not even minimum wage when you factor in materials and time." I stood in the doorway, my joy evaporating. It's not about the money. Someone connected with my work enough to want it in their home. Of course, I'm just being practical. Your teaching job is your real contribution. He finally glanced up. "Speaking of contributions, I'll be late again tonight. Don't wait up." After he left, I found myself searching his office. I'd never done anything like it before, but some instinct drove me to look in his briefcase desk drawers, even the pockets of his discarded clothing. In the inside pocket of a jacket he'd worn the previous day, I found a receipt for dinner at La Maison, the 5-star French restaurant where I'd been trying to get a reservation for our upcoming anniversary. 2 entrees, expensive wine, and a dessert listed as special request with message. When Thomas came home after midnight, I confronted him with the receipt. "Business dinner?" he said smoothly. "Potential new client." The dessert was for his wife's birthday, which he mentioned during appetizers. I had them write a message on the plate to impress him. It sounded plausible. It always sounded plausible. Yet another receipt a week later for a woman's scarf from a boutique I loved, but Thomas had always called overpriced, was explained as a gift for my mother's birthday. His mother's birthday was 4 months away, and she'd mentioned disliking scarves at Christmas. But when I pointed this out, Thomas looked at me with such conviction that I was made to feel like the irrational one. "I'm planning ahead, and Mom said she dislikes wool scarves because they itch. This is silk. Why are you keeping track of receipts and interrogating me? This paranoia is becoming concerning, Corinne." Each explanation chipped away at my self-confidence. Each time I questioned something, I was made to feel unstable, paranoid, or simply not smart enough to understand the complexities of Thomas's work and social obligations. As our 10th anniversary approached, I felt myself grasping at straws. I decided to plan a dinner with our closest friends, people who had known us throughout our relationship. Perhaps in their presence, Thomas would remember what we once had. Perhaps in public, he would recommit to our marriage rather than embarrass us both by continuing to pull away. It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had left. I spent weeks planning our 10th anniversary dinner, pouring all my hopes for our marriage into every detail. I reserved a private room at Bellini's, the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first official date. I invited the 5 couples who had been our closest friends throughout our marriage, most of whom we hadn't seen together in months due to Thomas's work schedule. When I told Thomas about the dinner, he seemed surprisingly amenable. 10 years is significant. We should market properly," he said, actually looking up from his laptop. This small sign of interest kindled hope. Perhaps he'd been as aware as I was that we'd been drifting apart. Perhaps this milestone would help us find our way back to each other. The day of our anniversary, I took particular care with my appearance. I wore the midnight blue dress I'd worn on our 5th anniversary when Thomas had surprised me with a weekend trip to the coast. I styled my hair the way he'd always liked it, loose waves framing my face. I even wore the perfume he'd given me 2 Christmases ago, which had remained largely untouched on my vanity. Thomas dressed with equal care in a charcoal suit, that emphasized his broad shoulders and the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. When we stood side by side before leaving, I caught a glimpse of us in the hallway mirror. We looked like the perfect couple, successful and polished. If I ignored the distance in his eyes, I could almost believe we still were. The private dining room at Bellini's was exactly as I'd requested, with soft lighting from wall sconces and candles on the large round table set for 12. Our friends greeted us warmly with hugs and anniversary wishes. For a moment, surrounded by familiar faces in a place filled with good memories, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The first hour passed pleasantly. We ordered appetizers and wine, catching up on children's achievements, career developments, and travel plans. Thomas was charming and engaged, his hand occasionally resting on mine in a gesture that felt both familiar and foreign after months of minimal physical contact. "You two are still the gold standard," said Mark, raising his glass in a casual toast. "A decade, and still looking at each other like newlyweds." I smiled tightly, wondering if our performance was that convincing, or if our friends were simply seeing what they expected to see. As the main courses arrived, Thomas grew increasingly distracted, checking his phone under the table. I pretended not to notice, keeping the conversation flowing with questions about Jennifer's promotion and David's new boat. Then a server entered with a bouquet of red and white roses so large she could barely carry it. "Delivery for the anniversary couple," she announced, placing them at the center of the table. My heart lifted. Had Thomas arranged this surprise? But when I turned to thank him, his face had drained of color. He looked not pleased, but panicked. "Who are they from?" asked Samantha, leaning forward to admire the arrangement. The server checked the card. "It just says, 'Forever yours.'" Thomas abruptly stood and excused himself, phone already at his ear, as he strode from the room. In his absence, our friends exchanged glances. "Romantic gesture?" David asked uncertainly. I forced a smile. "Must be, though Thomas usually prefers lilies." The roses sat between us like a garish accusation. They weren't from Thomas, and we both knew it. When he returned 5 minutes later, his expression had shifted from panic to resolve. He sat down, squeezed my hand briefly, and rejoined the conversation with unnatural enthusiasm, laughing too loudly at jokes and refilling wine glasses with mechanical precision. As dessert was served, a tiramisu cake decorated with "Happy 10th Anniversary" in chocolate script, I decided to make one last effort to salvage the evening and perhaps our marriage. I raised my glass. "I'd like to toast my husband," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thomas, these 10 years have been an adventure. We've built a life I'm proud of, and while no marriage is perfect, ours has given me more joy than I ever expected. Here's to many more decades together, continuing to grow and learn from each other." Our friends raised their glasses with murmurs of agreement. Thomas met my eyes briefly before looking away, then slowly stood his own glass in hand. "I'd like to say something too," he said, his voice strangely formal. He cleared his throat. "Corinne and I have shared 10 years together, and I will always be grateful for that time." The shift to past tense sent ice through my veins. But I've realized recently that gratitude isn't enough. Life is too short to live without complete honesty and, he faltered momentarily, and complete love. A heavy silence fell over the table. I sat perfectly still, as though any movement might shatter me into pieces. "The truth is, I can't live a lie anymore," Thomas continued, not looking at me now. "I've found the kind of love I didn't know was possible, the kind that makes you want to be a better person every day." Jennifer gasped softly. Mark stared fixedly at his plate. No one seemed able to look at either Thomas or me. "Amanda and I have been trying to find the right way to tell everyone. I wanted our friends to hear it from me directly, to understand and hopefully support us both through this transition." My mind went blank with shock. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not with everyone watching. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain of his words. "Amanda is actually waiting outside," Thomas added, checking his phone. "I've asked her to join us so you can all meet her properly." Before anyone could respond, the door to our private room opened and Amanda stepped in, wearing a simple black dress that made her look both elegant and uncomfortable. She hovered uncertainly at the threshold, taking in the stunned faces around the table. Time seemed to stop. I was aware of my heart pounding the press of the chair against my back, the distant clink of glasses from the main restaurant. Everything narrowed to this moment of complete devastation in front of the people who knew us best. Then, from some reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed, I stood. My legs felt like they might buckle, but my voice came out clear and steady. "Amanda," I said, looking directly at her across the room. "Thanks for taking out my trash." For one eternal second, there was silence. Then David snorted quickly, trying to disguise it as a cough. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, and suddenly the tension broke as laughter erupted around the table, nervous at first, then genuine. Amanda's face flushed crimson. Thomas's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his script for the evening completely derailed. "Corinne," he finally managed, his voice tight with anger. "This isn't a joke." "No," I agreed calmly. "It's definitely not." I turned to our friends. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate what was good about our marriage. I think the wake will have to be scheduled for another time." I picked up my purse, nodded to Amanda, who still stood frozen in the doorway, and walked out with as much dignity as I could muster. Behind me, chaos erupted, voices overlapping in shocked questions and more nervous laughter. In the restaurant's elegant bathroom, I locked myself in a stall and pressed my forehead against the cool door. I had just lost my husband, my partner of 10 years, in the most humiliating way possible. Yet somehow, improbably, I had managed to walk out with my head held high. My phone buzzed with messages from our friends. "Dina, we're all leaving. Where are you? Do you need us?" I took a deep breath, fixed my makeup, and texted back. "Going home. I'll be okay. Thank you for being there." It wasn't true yet, but someday I hoped it would be. The remainder of that evening passed in a blur. After composing myself in the bathroom, I stepped outside to find most of our friends waiting in the parking lot. "That was the most badass exit I've ever seen," Dina said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "We had no idea," Jennifer insisted, her eyes wide. "Thomas never gave any indication." "I'd like to give him an indication of my fist in his face," Mark muttered, his wife shooting him a warning glance. "We're coming home with you," Dina declared, not a question, but a statement of fact. "No arguments." I was too numb to protest. David and Samantha drove me home while Dina followed in her car. The others promised to check in tomorrow, their faces a mixture of concern and lingering shock. At home, Samantha made tea while David awkwardly patrolled the living room, as though Thomas might appear at any moment. When Dina arrived with 2 bottles of wine and a grocery bag full of comfort food, they finally left with promises to call in the morning. "Do you want to talk about it?" Dina asked, pouring generous glasses of Merlot. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. I knew things weren't good, but a public announcement inviting her to our anniversary dinner. "It was cruel," Dina agreed, "and incredibly narcissistic. Like he wanted to control the narrative, make himself the hero of his own love story, instead of the villain who cheated on his wife." We were halfway through the first bottle when the front door opened. Thomas walked in, his face a storm cloud. Seeing Dina, he stopped short. "Could we have some privacy?" he asked tightly. "Not a chance in hell," Dina replied, crossing her arms. "I'll be right in the kitchen if you need me, Corinne." She squeezed my shoulder as she passed, giving Thomas a look that could have frozen lava. As soon as we were alone, Thomas's controlled facade crumbled. "How could you humiliate me like that? That was beyond inappropriate." I stared at him in disbelief. "I humiliated you," You announced you were leaving me for another woman at our anniversary dinner in front of all our friends and then invited her in. I was trying to be honest, to handle it maturely so everyone would understand. You weren't being honest, Thomas. You were trying to control how people would see you. God forbid anyone think you're the bad guy who cheated on his wife. His face flushed. It wasn't like that. Amanda and I connected on a different level. We didn't plan for this to happen. How long? I asked, my voice dropping. How long has it been going on? He hesitated, and in that pause, I knew it had been significant. About a year, he finally admitted. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. A year. While I was planning date nights, he canceled. While I was trying to rekindle our connection. While I doubted my own perceptions and instincts. The work retreats, the late nights. He had the decency to look away. Sometimes, yes. And our home. Where exactly were you planning to live after tonight's grand announcement? Amanda and I have signed a lease on an apartment downtown. I was going to talk to you about selling the house, splitting the proceeds fairly. The casual way he discussed dismantling our life together made my stomach turn. You were planning to uproot me from my home. It's not fair for either of us to stay here alone. Too many memories. Too many memories he was eager to escape. Memories. I apparently should be willing to surrender along with my marriage. I'll be packing some essentials tonight, he continued as though we were discussing a business transaction. I'll come back for the rest when you're at work next week. I noticed then that he'd already changed from his suit into jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize, new clothes for his new life. What about our accounts? I asked, suddenly thinking of practical matters. I've transferred my share to a separate account for now until we sort things properly. Half of everything very fair. The next morning, after a night spent crying on Dina's shoulder, I discovered what fair meant to Thomas. Our joint savings account, which had held nearly $60,000, showed a transfer of $50,000 to an account I didn't recognize. Panic propelled me to check our other accounts. The checking account was intact, but with barely enough to cover the next mortgage payment. Our investment account had also been depleted with only about 20% of its previous value remaining. When I called Thomas, the call went straight to voicemail. My follow-up text received a terse reply. Needed to secure my future. You have the house equity. We'll sort details through lawyers. Dina found me hyperventilating in the kitchen. He took the money, I gasped. Almost everything. Her expression hardened. Call Mark right now. His brother is a divorce attorney. Mark's brother James agreed to see me that afternoon. As I explained the situation, his expression grew increasingly grave. This is not unusual, unfortunately, but it's definitely not legal, he explained. Emptying accounts just before announcing a separation is a red flag to any family court judge. Document everything, especially the timing right after your anniversary dinner. I left his office with a game plan and the first sense of control I'd felt in months. That evening, our friends rallied around me. Jennifer and her husband brought dinner. David helped change the locks. Samantha started a spreadsheet tracking all our major assets and debts. The following days passed in a blur of practical actions. I opened new accounts at a different bank. I gathered financial records. I documented the affair timeline as best I could recall. I started therapy. Thomas's attempts to contact me after being locked out of the house grew increasingly angry. This is petty and unnecessary, he texted. I'm entitled to my things. James advised me to respond minimally and document everything. We can arrange a supervised time for him to collect essentials, he texted on my behalf. When Thomas arrived with Amanda waiting in the car, our friend Mark stood silently in the corner of each room as Thomas packed clothes and personal items. His expression when he saw the empty spaces where his architectural awards had been displayed was almost comical. Where are my awards? He demanded. In the garage, I replied calmly. Along with everything else from your office. You can take it all. He looked momentarily lost, as though he'd expected to find our home unchanged waiting for him despite his betrayal. Social media became another battleground. Thomas posted about beginning a new chapter, with a artfully filtered photo of Amanda gazing at a sunset. Friends who didn't know the full story congratulated him. Those who did posted supportive messages on my profile instead. Thomas began crafting a revisionist history of our marriage, telling mutual acquaintances that we'd grown apart years ago and had stayed together out of habit. He portrayed Amanda as someone who helped him find the courage to be authentic. Each new twist of the narrative felt like a fresh betrayal, erasing not just our future, but rewriting our past. One week after the disastrous dinner, I sat across from my therapist, Dr. Marshall, trying to make sense of how quickly my life had imploded. "I keep replaying that moment at the restaurant," I admitted. "Not just what he did, but what I said. I don't even know where it came from." "It came from self-preservation," Dr. Marshall suggested. "Sometimes, when we're pushed to our limits, we find strength we didn't know we had." "But everyone saw. Everyone knows." "Yes, they do. And what do they know?" I considered this. They know he betrayed me. They know he tried to control the situation. And they know I didn't just collapse. Exactly. The shame isn't yours to carry, Corinne. In trying to manage how others would see him, Thomas inadvertently revealed his true character. And in that moment of crisis, you revealed yours too. It was a perspective I hadn't considered. The public nature of Thomas's announcement had indeed backfired on him. Rather than appearing as the honest man bravely following his heart, he came across as calculating and cruel. And somehow my instinctive response had given me an unexpected gift. I'd maintained my dignity when he'd tried to strip it away. Still, the road ahead looked impossibly long. How did one rebuild from such complete devastation? "One day at a time," Dr. Marshall said when I asked this aloud. "And remember, you're not starting from nothing. You had a life before Thomas, and you'll have one after him." That night alone in what had once been our bedroom, I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see the woman Dr. Marshall described. Someone with inherent worth separate from her marriage. Someone who could survive this betrayal and eventually thrive. I couldn't quite see her yet, but for the first time, I believed she might exist. The next 3 months were a battlefield of legal meetings, financial investigations, and emotional landmines. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories that gradually rebuilt my confidence. 2 weeks after Thomas moved out, my lawyer, James, discovered evidence that Thomas had been funneling joint funds into a separate account for months, including using our money to furnish the apartment he'd share with Amanda. "This is exactly what we need," James said, showing me the bank statements. Judges take a very dim view of hiding marital assets, especially when they're being used to support an affair. Armed with this evidence, we filed for an emergency hearing. Thomas arrived with an expensive attorney who argued that the transfers were investment strategies rather than attempts to hide assets. The judge was unconvinced. "The court orders all marital assets frozen pending further review," she declared. "Mr. Walsh, your personal expenditures will be limited to basic necessities until a complete accounting can be conducted." Thomas's face reddened as he realized his comfortable new life with Amanda would be considerably less comfortable than planned. The apartment lease he'd signed was well beyond what his personal salary could support without access to our joint savings. As we left the courthouse, I caught Amanda waiting in the lobby, her confident posture faltering when she saw Thomas's expression. For a moment, I felt a flicker of empathy. Had she really known what she was getting into? At home, I continued the process of reclaiming spaces Thomas had dominated. His home office, which had always been off limits to my clutter, became my art studio. I painted the walls a soft sage green, installed better lighting, and set up my easels by the windows overlooking the garden. The physical transformation mirrored my internal one. Each decision I made without consulting Thomas's preferences felt like a small rebellion. I moved furniture, replaced the coffee maker he'd insisted on with one I preferred, and donated suits he'd forgotten to the local shelter. My artwork reflected this evolution. The chaotic, fractured pieces from when I first suspected the affair gave way to bolder experiments with color and form. I started a series called Reclamation Abstract Landscapes Emerging from Darkness into Light. Painting became both therapy and purpose. When I wasn't working at school or dealing with divorce proceedings, I was in my studio. The first night I slept through without waking to cry was a milestone I celebrated with a small glass of champagne alone in my kitchen. Friends remained my lifeline. They established a rotation of dinner invitations, so I rarely ate alone on weekends. They accompanied me to movies, hiking trails, and art exhibitions. They listened without judgment when I needed to vent the same feelings for the 100th time. Dina was particularly relentless in her support. "You're coming to Lisa's birthday brunch on Saturday," she informed me 6 weeks after Thomas left. "And I've invited Michael." "Michael who?" "Michael Brennan, Lisa's colleague from the hospital. Divorced 2 years ago, no kids, likes hiking and jazz." "Dina, I'm not ready to date." "It's not a date. It's a group brunch where you might happen to sit near an attractive, kind emergency room doctor who Lisa swears is the most decent human being in Philadelphia." The brunch was a disaster. Michael was indeed kind and attractive, but every attempt at conversation felt like navigating a minefield. Did I mention Thomas? Pretend my marriage hadn't imploded? When Michael gently asked how long I'd lived in my neighborhood, I excused myself to cry in the bathroom. "Well, that was awful," I told Dina afterward. "Poor Michael probably thinks I'm completely unstable." "He thinks you're someone going through a difficult time who isn't ready to date," Dina corrected. "Which is fine, but at least you tried. First pancake is always a throwaway." Despite the awkwardness, the experience was valuable. I could now laugh about my disastrous first attempt at post-marriage socialization. And I had proof that life continued beyond Thomas, that new people and experiences awaited when I was ready. Work provided another anchor. My students noticed my renewed focus on my own art and responded with increased engagement in class. I started an after-school program for advanced students, creating a gallery space in the unused West Corridor to display their work. The school principal, impressed with the positive response, approved a small budget for art supplies and offered to feature student work at the district showcase. For the first time in years, I felt valued professionally in a way Thomas had never acknowledged. 8 weeks after our separation, I had an unexpected encounter. Walking into my usual coffee shop near school, I spotted Amanda sitting alone at a corner table. My first instinct was to leave, but she looked up before I could retreat. We stared at each other for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, surprisingly, she gestured to the chair across from her. Something in her expression, a mixture of resignation and regret, made me approach. "I don't know if we should be talking," I said, remaining standing. "Probably not," she agreed. "But since you're here, I wanted to say something. I'm sorry for how everything happened. The public announcement, that wasn't what we had discussed." I raised an eyebrow. "You discussed how to announce you were leaving me," she flushed. "Thomas said he wanted to be honest with you after the anniversary. A private conversation at home. The dinner reveal was unexpected." It was strange hearing that Thomas had blindsided not only me but also his affair partner. "Why are you telling me this?" Amanda looked down at her coffee. "Because Thomas told me your marriage was essentially over. That you both knew it, but were going through the motions. That you were cold and unsupportive of his career." A bitter laugh escaped me. "And you believed that classic cliché?" "I wanted to," she admitted. "It made what we were doing seem less wrong." I finally sat down, curious despite myself. "When did you realize it wasn't true?" "When I saw your face at the restaurant. You were completely shocked." And later, when I found out about the financial maneuvering, she hesitated. Thomas isn't who I thought he was. The validation from this unexpected source was oddly comforting. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined our marriage's solidity, nor had I caused its destruction through some failing on my part. I'm not staying with him, Amanda added quietly. I moved out last week. I should have felt triumph or satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange sense of closure. Thomas had lost both the women he'd tried to manipulate. Good luck, Amanda, I said, standing again. I hope your next relationship has more honesty than your last. She nodded, looking relieved that I hadn't created a scene. Your comment at the restaurant? It was impressive. Devastating, but impressive. Thanks for taking out my trash, I repeated softly, more to myself than to her. Funny how the truth just comes out sometimes. I ordered my coffee to go and left without looking back. There was a lightness in my step that hadn't been there before. The conversation had shifted something fundamental in how I viewed what had happened. I was no longer just Thomas's discarded wife. I was a woman who had stood up for herself in a moment of crisis, who other women, even my rival, respected. At my next session with Dr. Marshall, I recounted the coffee shop encounter. How do you feel about Amanda now? She asked. I considered this. Less angry. She was deceived too in a different way, but I don't feel responsible for her feelings either. And Thomas? This was harder to articulate. I'm still angry, but it's changing. Less about the affair itself and more about the dishonesty. The way he made me doubt myself. The things he said about me to others. That's significant progress, Dr. Marshall noted. You're separating the betrayal from your sense of self-worth. 6 months after the anniversary dinner, we reached a settlement agreement. Thomas, facing the evidence of financial misconduct and aware of how a court battle would further damage his reputation, agreed to terms that were decidedly in my favor. I kept the house and most of our joint savings. He kept his retirement accounts and assumed most of our limited debt. The day the agreement was finalized, I stood in my art studio watching autumn leaves drift from the maple tree in the backyard. The house that had once felt haunted by Thomas's absence now felt wholly mine. I had survived what I once thought would destroy me and emerged stronger, clearer about who I was and what I deserved. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party for the friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. As we raised glasses in a toast, Dina smiled at me across the table. To Corinne, she said, who reminded us all that sometimes taking out the trash is the first step to a cleaner house. The laughter that followed felt like healing. 1 year after the anniversary dinner disaster, I stood in a small gallery space downtown, surrounded by my artwork and people who had come to see it. The exhibition, titled Reconstruction, featured 20 pieces chronicling my journey from devastation to rebuilding. The gallery owner, Maria, had approached me after seeing my work in the school district showcase. Your paintings have a raw, emotional quality that's compelling, she said. Would you consider a small exhibition in our emerging artist space? I'd worked feverishly for months preparing expanding the Reclamation series and adding new pieces that pushed my technical boundaries. The result was more personal than anything I'd ever created, each canvas a visual diary entry from the past year. Now, watching strangers engage with my work, I felt a validation that went beyond the 3 red sold dots already placed on the price list. I had transformed my pain into something meaningful, something that resonated with others. Dina arrived fashionably late, air-kissing my cheeks, European style. This is magnificent, she declared, gesturing expansively. You're magnificent. It's just a small showing, I demurred. No, it's huge. Corinne from 2 years ago would never have put herself out there like this. She was too busy supporting Thomas's dreams to pursue her own. There was truth in her observation. I had shrunk myself to fit into Thomas's life, gradually surrendering my ambitions to become the supportive wife he needed. In losing him, I'd paradoxically found myself. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, the legal document arriving with surprising little emotional impact. By then, I had already grieved the marriage and moved forward. The settlement allowed me to reduce my teaching hours to part-time, creating space for my artistic pursuits without financial strain. My professional life had found a balance I'd never imagined possible. I loved teaching, but no longer felt trapped by it. My artwork sold modestly but consistently. I had begun mentoring 2 promising students from underfunded schools, helping them prepare portfolios for college applications. The house, once a source of painful memories, had become truly mine. I'd remodeled the kitchen I'd always disliked, but Thomas had insisted was perfectly functional. I'd painted the living room the deep terracotta color he'd vetoed as too dramatic. Each change erased another layer of his presence. Our friend circle had shifted and realigned. Some couples had quietly drifted toward Thomas, uncomfortable with the messiness of taking sides. Others had remained steadfastly in my corner. New friends from art classes and gallery openings had entered my life, people who knew me only as I was, now not as half of a former couple. Through mutual friends, I heard occasional updates about Thomas. His relationship with Amanda had indeed collapsed within months. His firm had lost a major client after Thomas's unprofessional handling of project deadlines during the tumultuous period of our separation. He'd been passed over for partnership consideration. I took no pleasure in his setbacks, but neither did I feel responsible for them. Thomas had made his choices, and now he was living with their consequences. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, he called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Corinne," he said, his voice carrying the forced casualness I'd once found charming. "How have you been?" "I'm well, Thomas. What do you need?" He paused, perhaps thrown by my directness. "I've been doing some reflecting about how things ended between us. I may have been hasty in some of my decisions." "Hasty? You had an affair for a year before leaving me at our anniversary dinner." "That's not... yes, but that's not what I meant." He sounded flustered. "Things with Amanda didn't work out. She wasn't who I thought she was." I waited silently, unwilling to make this conversation easier for him. "Anyway," he continued when I didn't respond, "I've been thinking about us, about what we had. It wasn't all bad, was it? We had some good years." "Yes, we did. Before you decided to betray and humiliate me." "People make mistakes, Corinne. Isn't there room for forgiveness? Maybe we could get coffee sometime, talk about things. I miss our conversations." The Thomas of a year ago would have expected me to jump at this olive branch, grateful for his willingness to consider reconciliation. The Corinne of a year ago might have been tempted, might have seen it as validation that I was worthy of being chosen again. But we were different people now. "No, Thomas," I said calmly. "I don't think that would be good for either of us. I wish you well, but our conversation ended a year ago at Bellini's." "Is there someone else?" he asked, a note of jealousy evident. I laughed softly. The irony of that question isn't lost on me. But no, there isn't. I'm just not interested in revisiting our past. Goodbye, Thomas. I ended the call feeling lighter, as though I'd set down a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The final thread connecting us had been severed not by circumstance, but by my choice. Dating remained complicated territory. After the brunch disaster with Michael, I'd retreated from the possibility for months. Eventually, with gentle encouragement from friends, I'd tried again, accepting dinner invitations and setting up a profile on a dating app. There had been a few pleasant evenings, one disastrous lunch, and one promising connection with Gabriel, a literature professor at the local university. We'd been seeing each other casually for 2 months, enjoying museums, concerts, and long conversations about books and art. He knew about Thomas and the anniversary dinner incident, reacting with appropriate indignation, but never pressing for more details than I offered. "I like that you don't define yourself by what happened," he told me one evening as we walked through a sculpture garden. "It shaped you, but it isn't who you are." His observation resonated with the journey I'd been on. The betrayal had indeed shaped me, forcing growth I might otherwise have avoided. But it was just one chapter in my story, not the defining narrative. At the gallery showing surrounded by tangible evidence of that growth, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for what Thomas had done, but for how I had responded to it. For the friends who had supported me, for the therapist who had guided me, for my own resilience I hadn't known I possessed. As the evening wound down, Maria approached with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations," she said, handing it to me. "4 sales tonight and a commission request for something similar to Emergence." I accepted the glass, noticing a familiar face across the room. Jennifer, one of the friends present at the infamous anniversary dinner, was examining a painting with her husband. "This one," she said when I approached. "It speaks to me. What do you call it?" The canvas showed a woman standing at a threshold, looking out at a landscape bathed in dawn light. Behind her, shadows receded into darkness. "It's called Thanks for Taking Out My Trash," I replied with a smile. "It seemed fitting." Jennifer laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "The line that launched 1,000 healing moments. We still quote it, you know. Whenever someone makes a difficult but necessary change." I had no idea it would become my catchphrase, I admitted. "Some things you just can't plan," Jennifer said, squeezing my arm. "Like finding your voice at exactly the moment when someone tries to silence it." Later that night, alone in my house that now truly felt like home, I sat in my studio looking at sketches for new work. The exhibition had marked a milestone, but art like healing was an ongoing process. There were still difficult days, moments when grief or anger resurfaced unexpectedly. But they no longer defined me. I had learned that sometimes the most devastating moments contain the seeds of our greatest strength. That public humiliation can become public redemption. That losing what we thought we wanted can lead us to what we truly need. Most importantly, I had learned that I was not defined by Thomas's betrayal, or by my marriage, or even by my quick comeback line at the restaurant. I was defined by the woman who emerged from that experience, who rebuilt herself piece by piece, creating a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one that had been taken from her. As I closed my sketchbook, I realized I was finally at peace with my past. Not because I had forgotten or forgiven everything, but because I had grown beyond it. The woman who had once built her life around a husband's needs and dreams now lived for her own, and that was the greatest reclamation of all. Have you ever experienced a moment when a perfectly timed comeback helped you reclaim your power in a difficult situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of rebuilding after betrayal resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and transformation. Remember, sometimes the trash takes itself out, making room for the beautiful life you deserve. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the perfect words when you need them most.